Hey, everybody. What's going on? Keith Niebuhr with Gators Online, and I'm joined by Nick Delatorre, senior beat writer covering the Florida Gators for Gators Online as well. We're going to play a game today, ceiling and floor, best case scenario, worst case scenario, but with realistic expectations. I mean, sure, Florida could finish 11-1, 12-1, Nick, but we're trying to be realistic about this. This isn't a pie in the sky show. We're not pie in the sky reporters. We want to be realistic about this team and this roster from based on what you've seen from the Gators so far. One third of the way into the season. So ceiling and floor, best case scenario and worst case scenario. And Nick, you've got a pretty optimistic best case scenario, I think, based on where people had Florida projected this summer. Many of the so-called experts out there had Florida winning 4, 5, 6 games. And you think with them sitting at 3-1 right now, there's a potential for them to finish with 8 or 9 regular season wins, which would be absolutely huge in Billy Napier's second year. We're going to do the game-by-game breakdown in just a minute, Nick, but what have you seen so far to think that an 8 or 9 win regular season is possible?
Well, when you look at Florida, the defense has taken such a step forward with Austin Armstrong. I think that's the biggest thing. You know, there's so many times. How many times as a Florida fan have you watched the season? Go back just to 2020, and you're thinking, man, if Florida had any semblance of a defense, this is a playoff team. Look how good the offense is. Or you go back to those Will Muschamp years, and you're like, if the offense could just score 17 points, Florida would probably win 12 games. Florida's got a defense right now, while young, playing at a really high level. And I think you have a great mix of veterans and young players. You're able to rotate guys in and out. So I like Florida on defense pretty much every Saturday now, probably outside that Saturday at Jacksonville. Offensively, Florida's not turning the ball over at a high clip. They have a negative turnover margin on the year, but they've only created 1 turnover. So on defense, I think some of that turnover luck might change. And then offensively, Florida just knows its identity. Like, hey, we're going to need to run the ball. We need to win the time of possession. We're not super explosive right now. So I think Florida knows its identity and is playing to it. So with a defense that can limit, I think Florida has really 1 drive a game on defense where you'll see them kind of deteriorate a little bit and give up a long touchdown drive. Outside of that, Florida's defense is playing great. Graham Mertz is taking care of the football. That's a huge thing. And if Florida can get healthy, I go and look at their offensive line and think Florida should be able to run the ball. They haven't had this. They've had 1 starting 5 offensive line play together in 2 games, and that's it. The first game was different. Games 2 and 3 were the same. Game 4, a brand new line, after the boxing match at the end of Tennessee. So I think once you start to get some continuity on the offensive line, that's only going to help the running game. Getting Eugene Wilson back, he's an X factor for you offensively. So while Florida's offense isn't going to excite me or excite many players or people, the defense should keep them in games. And I think Florida's good enough to stick to their game plan and score when they need to.
All right, so let's take a look at the game-by-game projections by you. As of right now, look, this changes every week. Somebody gave me grief for doing the ceiling and floor on the message board the other day. They said, you can't do this every week. And, well, yeah, you can, because things change every week. Guys emerge. Guys de-emerge. Guys get hurt.
De-emerge. That's a new one in the dictionary.
Freshmen take off. Veterans plummet. Yeah, I mean, so many. Look, there's a wide array of things can happen. Yes,
injuries happen. Other players on other teams start to emerge.
That's right.
Many factors that go into the game.
That's right. So we're looking at all these factors, and Nick, let's get right into this. This is your 8-4 projection. 8-4. You've got Florida beating Kentucky this weekend, beating Vanderbilt, beating South Carolina, losing to Georgia, beating Arkansas back at home, losing to LSU on the road, beating Missouri on the road, which would be a big one. Obviously, they've started off 4-0, and then losing to Florida State at home. But you also think that Florida State game, look, depending upon how Florida grows as a team, that could change. That could turn into a W at some point. But 8-4, second year in the Billy Napier regime. This is what you believe to be the ceiling right now, that 8-win, 9-win range. What are the key games in here for you to get to that 8 or 9 wins?
This week, Kentucky. Florida's only had 1 road test, and that was an app. Just failed. Multiple guys wearing the same number on special teams, offsides, holding, delay of game. I need to see Florida learn from how poorly they played at Utah and not create those same mistakes. When I look at this Florida team, yes, the defense is great, but I think the margin of error is just so razor thin for Florida. They cannot beat themselves and beat Kentucky. They will not lose the turnover battle and have more penalties than Kentucky and still come out with a win. So to me, this week Kentucky will show me. If Florida goes out and just lays an egg again this week on the road, then I start to think differently about the South Carolina game. And sure, Florida.
We'll get to the floor. Yeah, we'll get to the floor in a minute. But
this week to me is big. How do you look like on the road? What have you done to fix those procedural penalties? We hear all off season, Keith. It's not just year 2 for the players; it's year 2 for the coaching staff as well. That team did not look ready, coached ready, or prepared to play on the road in week 1. Now that it is week 1, but that also means you had 4 months to get ready for it. So I need to see Florida on the road this week clean up the stuff that we saw in Salt Lake City.
It was week 1 for the other team too. That's what I always say. But you're fairly optimistic here. You've got this negative Nick rap, but you've got them winning at Kentucky. You've got them winning at South Carolina, 2 tough places to play. You've got them winning at Missouri in November when it's probably going to be one of those noon games, Nick, that's 43 degrees. And historically, if you go back, Florida has lost cold weather games at Missouri, at Vanderbilt, and at Kentucky. Now, they don't play Kentucky at that time of year anymore, but if you go back historically, Nick, well before you were born, back in the 1970s, some very talented Florida teams got derailed in that cold weather environment in Lexington. So, but that says to me that you're looking at them and saying, I think they've got some real potential here to grow as a team and to go on the road and win, because since Billy Napier's been at Florida, there's really only been one signature road win, if my memory is correct, and that was at Texas A&M last year. And quite frankly, they won 5 games. They won 5 games. They self-destructed. But so this would be a significant step forward. A loss at Jacksonville to a team that's number 1 in the country right now. A loss at LSU. That's an interesting game for me, though, because LSU has been a completely mixed bag so far this season. I know it's a tough place to play, but I actually think Florida, we'll see what happens. Let's see what happens to Florida in the next 4 or 5 games. But based on what I've seen so far, I think Florida is built to go out there and at least give LSU a game based on the ability to run the ball. But look, you've got them winning 3 big road games, beating Vanderbilt at home, which they need to beat Vanderbilt at home. If they don't, then I don't know if it doesn't go sideways pretty fast if you lose that one. But then also beating Arkansas at home in the blackout game. And, Arkansas's got a veteran quarterback. I don't think there is so far. We're only 4 games in. I don't think they're quite as good as people in Arkansas certainly thought they would be or hoped they would be. And then obviously, Nick, let me ask you this. You've got them losing to Florida State at home. And we've identified Florida, the Swamp, as one of the probably 2 or 3 toughest places to play in the SEC. If Florida goes into that game, as you're projecting at 8-3, or excuse me, with your ceiling, this is the ceiling for the team, not a straight projection. At 8-3, it stands to reason. Sometimes when you're 8-3, you play like an 8-3 team as opposed to a 6-win team. And also, how much is that home field worth? Okay, and FSU could be playing for a lot. Not only that, ACC championship game the next week. So for many years, Florida had the disadvantage of having to play FSU and then the SEC championship the next week. The shoe would be on the other foot. Let's see where they're at mentally. Let's see where they're at physically. Do they hold people out? So that is a really interesting matchup. But 8-4,
the Swamp has been great, and like you mentioned, Keith, 8-3 with a chance to play spoiler to smash Florida State's glass slipper. The Swamp would be rocking. I think kids would leave their parents home from Thanksgiving. The students would be back in attendance for that game. I expect that certainly to be sold out, to be a great atmosphere. Florida just struggled last year getting Jordan Travis to the ground, and that's partly Florida not being a great tackling team, but also credit to Jordan Travis. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. So if Florida has, and if you're winning that game like that, I've said all along, like after Georgia, like that back half of the schedule is brutal. Arkansas is really physical. You're probably going to get beat up a little bit playing Georgia. Arkansas is going to come in there, and they're a really physical team. That trip to Missouri, you said noon, Keith. That's 11 a.m. local. November 18th in Missouri.
Yeah.
We might be looking at snow flurries in Missouri.
Nick, you always get the feeling when Missouri plays Florida, it's like the freaking Super Bowl to Missouri. You know what I mean? Like it is
it's just been such a weird series. Yeah. Like Missouri came in and everyone thought this team doesn't deserve to be in the SEC. They won the SEC East twice. Florida had a game where like they blow Missouri out and there's a bunch of turnovers and stuff. And then a year, 2 years, 3 years later, Florida is like the shoes on the other foot. And Florida has all these turnovers and miscues and gets blown out. This has just been the Florida-Missouri series has just been back and forth. And there's really no rhyme or reason to what happens any given year. But like I've covered a lot of Florida games, Keith. The Florida teams I've covered love losing that game late in the season.
I don't think they loved it, but all right. So 8-4, 9-3 ceiling based on what we know about Florida right now, based on what we know about the teams they're playing. Obviously, these things can change. There's going to be people arguing with us to no end on this, Nick. I know. All right.
Sure.
Next up, the floor. This is the part that nobody really wants to go over, but let's get to the floor. All right, we've got Florida losing. Again, this would be the floor. Worst case scenarios, okay? A loss this weekend probably sets you toward that 6-win area. A loss this weekend, we still think, or you still think they come back and beat Vanderbilt. Still think you've got them beating South Carolina in both of these scenarios. That's interesting. Obviously, South Carolina's having some real offensive line woes right now. Lost to Georgia. Still beating Arkansas under both these scenarios. That's significant. Lost to LSU, lost to Missouri, lost to FSU. 6-6. Worst case scenario. Now, Nick, that's not a terrible floor, I have to say, because the floor out there among the national pundits in June, July, and August, some people projected 3 wins. So that's right. So if your projected floor is 6 wins, that's not terrible.
Yeah.
But what you don't want to do is you don't want to dip below 6 wins. You don't want that would be third losing season in a row. So under this scenario, Nick, 6-6 is not the end of the world. You'd still be going to a bowl game. But as you mentioned earlier, so much hinges on this Kentucky game.
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot about Florida. You know, I got killed by Tennessee fans telling them that I think Florida's going to run the football on Tennessee. And they said, nobody does. And I said, well, you haven't played anybody. So don't tell me that Virginia didn't run the ball or Austin Peay didn't. Like, this is a different test. We don't really know a lot about Kentucky. Kentucky hasn't played
Nick, I mean,
yet.
Nick, if you thought Tennessee's schedule was easy early on, what do you think of Kentucky's schedule so far?
Kentucky has purchased 3 wins. They had 3 pay-to-win games, and then they played Vanderbilt. So it's been a nice month to be a Kentucky fan. Nice little ease into basketball season. This is going to be Kentucky's first big test. Can Kentucky figure out how to run the ball? Do they continue turning the ball over? Florida's only caused 1 turnover this year, and it was an arm punt by Joe Milton. He literally threw the ball into the middle of no one, like right at Devin Moore. So Kentucky's turning the ball over at alarming rates, but they're also creating turnovers. Florida not turning the ball over very much, but also not creating turnovers. I go back to the procedural issues. You have to clean that up. Florida won't win in Kentucky if they have procedural issues like they had in Salt Lake City. They're just not built like that. Another interesting thing, this isn't like the Kentucky team that you're used to. It's not 3 yards in a cloud of dust and play some great defense. Kentucky, like, they don't have a great offensive like expectancy to have great positive plays, but they have one of the best, most explosive teams offenses in the country. So it's almost like 3 and out, 70-yard touchdown. 3 and out, 65-yard touchdown. And Florida has been susceptible when we saw them against Tennessee of giving up big plays. And I think that's going to come with Austin Armstrong's defense. You're being aggressive, playing man, and sometimes guys get beat.
Now, positive Nick, upbeat Nick, 8-9 wins, 3 big road wins. All right. Negative Nick, not that negative. I got to tell you, I thought negative Nick would have them at 4 wins on this feeling.
But there's 4 wins. I don't want to live on it.
What's that?
Yeah. I don't want to live on the message boards.
No, I'm
3-1 and then wins 1 out of the next 8, Keith.
I have to say, so this is, I think if you're a Florida fan and you followed a Florida fan that's followed Nick Delatore's work, if he being you, thinks that 6-6 is the floor, that's a sign to me, if I'm a Florida fan, that I feel like this is a guy that's covered the team for many years and he's seeing progress. Mm-hmm. He's seeing progress because I still see a road win there at South Carolina. I still see a home win against Arkansas. You believe the floor is not total destruction, total sideways, total, and I think that's a positive. I think even in this negative scenario, that's a positive, quite frankly, Nick.
I mean, my ceiling has Florida going into Georgia 6-1. Someone told me Florida could go into Georgia 6-1 before the year, and I asked them to do a drug test. I'm like, what are you on? There's no way. So, like, my ceiling, yeah. My floor is if you lose to Kentucky, then I start doubting, like you mentioned earlier, Keith, can this team go on the road and win games? Then maybe I'm looking at that South Carolina game differently. I just don't really think Spencer Rattler is that great. I kind of have a similar opinion to him and Joe Milton, and then they're dealing with a bunch of issues on their offensive line. Will that game be a night game? Florida struggled there 2 years ago with Dan Mullen when that was a night game. But I think before the season, I thought Florida would be a 6-win team or a 7-win team, and 8 would be everything going well. So if Florida finishes 8-4, I'm thinking, man, this was an incredible year. And to me, besides the procedural issues, look how good Utah's looked, Keith. Like,
that's right.
Playing without their number one tight end, their number one quarterback, playing without a bunch of guys on defense, and they're still 4-0. They look great. That loss looks better every week, despite how you looked like it was the first week of spring practice, not the first week of the season, just with procedural issues.
Yeah, my whole thing, Nick, is I feel like if this is the key game, obviously, this week, to having a winning record. I feel like if Florida goes to Kentucky and wins, I feel very good that they're going to finish with the winning record. Again, right now, if you're a Florida fan, you're looking for progress. You're looking for steps forward. Okay, this is still a young team. This is still a team with a new quarterback. This is still a team with a completely rebuilt offensive line. Now you could obviously ask, okay, what's the offensive line going to look like next year? We'll get to that when we get to that. But it's a rebuilt offensive line. You've got, like I said, all the newcomers, both via transfer portal and the freshmen. And if you can go out there and put a winning record against this schedule, conceivably you should be better next year. More veteran guys, more influx of talent through the transfer portal, more influx of talent through freshmen, potential guys, difference makers, guys that can come in and play right away. It won't be all 25 of them, but it may be 5 or 6 of them. You're looking at a better roster. Schedule gets harder next year. We think you don't really know till you go out and play it, but you should be better armed to go out there next year. So if you can get through this year, again, a year where people thought that a losing season wasn't just possible, but was likely, you beat Kentucky and all of a sudden a winning season is likely. Then you beat Vanderbilt, you've got 5 wins. If you somehow beat each of these next 3 teams and get to 6 wins, you're looking like 8 wins, 9 wins, regular season or bowl game, and I don't think anybody would have a complaint with that. I think, Nick, that would be completely satisfactory, or I don't know if that's the right word. I think that would Gator Nation would see a team on the rise. It takes time to build these things. The roster was a mess. The culture was a mess, and now you'd be seeing real progress, Nick.
Yeah. I think there'll be some fans that, hey, their Gators aren't winning sexy and they're not winning pretty. And they won't pass some fans' eye test. But to me, I don't care how you get to 8 wins. If you get to 8 wins with this roster and in this schedule, that is a resounding success for Florida this season.
All right. That will do it for Ceiling and Floor with Keith Niebuhr and Nick Delatorre of Gators Online. We appreciate everybody stopping by. Feel free to like this video if you like it. If you don't like it,
it's free.
I like it anyway. Yeah, that's right. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave a comment. Hey, tell us what you think the ceiling is for this Florida football team. Tell us what you think the floor is for this football team. I'm sort of with you, Nick. I think 8-9 wins is probably the ceiling. But again, I do say this, sometimes when you start winning, if you can kind of get it rolling, you can play a little bit above your head. If you're 6-1, you play like you're 6-1. Consequently, there are some key games coming up that you just can't afford to lose if you want to have a winning record and show progress in year 2. So we'll see how it goes. We appreciate everybody stopping by right now at Gators Online. $1 gets you your foot in the door. $1 gets you 1 full month of the best team insight, team intel, and recruiting scoop in the marketplace. And we also think, Nick, that we have the best message board community out there in Gator Nation. So stop on by Gators Online. We appreciate you checking out this YouTube show. Thanks again. Take care, everybody.